What's up everybody, Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new video where we're gonna be breaking down the best to worst ultimate tier list, where we're gonna be talking about every single ultimate in the game of Valorant, and we're gonna be giving you some tips and tricks about each one to guaranteed get a little bit more value in your games. But of course, the Game Leap website is the #1 place to get the maximum amount of value, where we have in-depth VOD reviews, advanced videos over every single character talked about in this video, and we have even more in-depth psychology, positioning, esports related content, everything you need to climb and become a better player. So do yourself a favor and go check it out in the links down below. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Now, kicking it off with the first ultimate on the list, the best ultimate in the entire game. The only thing that's still good about her character, all joking aside, the best ultimate is Resurrect on Sage. Now, unfortunately, she can't res herself because Morello literally straight up murdered her, but Resurrect is undoubtedly one of the most powerful ultimates in this game, and for us, we put it in the #1 spot. When you have Sentinels investing a Sage wall plus a smoke just to funnel Resurrection ult points to Sage in pro matches, you know that it might be something special. Now, Sage's Resurrect, the reason that it's so good is it can turn so many different team fights. There is no type of advantage more valuable than numbers advantage, and Sage can basically level the playing field with her Resurrect. Now, of course, if you are still playing Sage for whatever reason, you got to make sure that when you're investing Resurrect, you are isolating the angles that enemies can push you from. Whether that means walling off one section and holding the next, or it means making sure to clear certain areas before you go for a res, whatever the case may be, try to make sure that you ensure that the Resurrect goes off safely without getting both of you killed. Now, another aspect of that is now that the Sage wall breaks so easily, if you res and you know an enemy is there, you can't expect the wall to actually survive focus fire and for you to get the res completely off. So a lot of times you can't be using your wall if an enemy is nearby like you could before. You really just need it just in case an enemy is there, not a this is a wall to block an enemy from killing us. Now, the next most powerful ability in the entire game, taking our second place spot, is none other than Neuro Theft on Cypher. Now, Neuro Theft is a incredibly powerful ability. We've talked about it many times on this channel that information is king in Valorant. And if you know information about where enemies are, you can better rotate, make a plan, make a play. The possibilities are endless when you have that information about the enemy. Now, the thing about Cypher's Neuro Theft that you need to be doing very often is you need to be making a game plan the second the enemy team pop up on that minimap. And remember, a lot of times things are going to happen incredibly quickly. Like if you Neuro Theft near an enemy, a lot of times they're going to push you. Or if you Neuro Theft and enemies are rotating one place, they might turn around and rotate the other place. So there is a little bit of unpredictability involved, and Neuro Theft is going to get better and better the later you wait to use it. I know that there is a limit on the corpses, but you got to remember that if the enemy only have 20 seconds left, or if they have very little time remaining, using that Neuro Theft in that moment where the enemy's options are slim, that's going to be exponentially more value. Essentially, having known positional information gets greatly more valuable the less potential mix-ups and options the enemy have. Now, as a tip against Neuro Theft, you gotta keep in mind, specifically on defense, if enemies use Neuro Theft against you, identify where the weakness is in your entire area. For example, let's say you have only one person A, you have 3 B and 1 mid. The second they use that ultimate and they discover that there's only one person on A, it is very likely that they are going to be pushing A because that's where the less people are. They're not realistically going to be pushing the point with the 3 stacked people. So you can get some information, or rather you can predict what the enemy is going to do with the information they have, and that is the way that you can outbrain the Cypher main. Yeah, okay, sorry. Anyways, moving on to the next tip that I got for you in the video, or rather the next ultimate on our list in the third ultimate spot is From the Shadows by Omen. Now, Omen's From the Shadows is becoming one of the staple ultimates in the game right now, with Omen seeing a lot of play and him getting a lot of value with this ultimate. And the reason that it's so high up on this list is that it's versatile. It can be used for information as a pseudo, not quite as good Neuro Theft, of course, but still pretty good. It can also be used to make a play on the enemy. It can be used to rotate for quick plants, rotate to sneak in and defuse, put pressure on the enemy. Whatever the case may be, you got options, and no one is denying that there is a huge skill ceiling for this ultimate. Now, the most important thing that you need to understand when ulting using From the Shadows is that when you are going to ult, you need to be deciding what you're going to be doing before in advance to place yourself in the best possible position. Let me give you this example. If you want to rotate and you want to plant the spike, that's what you want to do with your ultimate. You should be ulting right where you're gonna plant and start planting immediately. You're not trying to gather information. You set up a scenario where you can rotate where enemies are very unlikely or it's impossible for them to be on the other side. You teleport there, you plant, right? Now, if you're trying to gather information, you should be ulting not in default in some place that has natural cover. You should be ulting right in the middle of the area with the maximum amount of range so you can see the maximum amount of information. You're not setting up for a plant, you're setting up for information. And the important thing is, if you try to mix these up and split the difference too much or unnecessarily, you're gonna set yourself up in a scenario where you're teleporting yourself to be behind cover, but you don't get enough information that you need, and you stick the teleport only for enemies to be right around the corner. If you would have just teleported in a way where you could see the maximum amount of area, you would have saw that enemy and realized that that area is not safe. So that's just one thing of many to think about, but honestly, I could probably make an entire video talking about From the Shadows. But if you want to see that, for whatever reason, if you want to see an in-depth breakdown of pros using this ultimate, definitely let us know in the comments down below. Now for the next ultimate on our list, number 4 is Orbital Strike by Brimstone. Now, Orbital Strike is really good for a lot of reasons. The first one is, like with a lot of ultimates, it can be used to dissuade people from planting, dissuade people from potentially defusing, or whatever the case may be. And its large radius means that if an enemy is low, you could easily kill them, and it's going to be able to kind of guess the entire area of where an enemy is going to be. For example, if you try to snag someone that is planting a spike with Hunter's Fury, for instance, there's a lot bigger margin for error. You might miss and not hit that person. But with Orbital Strike, the area is so big that it's actually very likely for you to hit them. Now, on top of that, with Orbital Strike, you need to be thinking about constantly what ultimates or forms of information you can use to actually get some value. Whether the enemy sage has resurrected and you know where that person was, you could ult them into oblivion. When your Cypher's Nerve Theft comes on and you see everybody, you could already be ulting so that you know where they are and you ult them into the Shadow Realm. If your Sova sets up a scenario where he finds an enemy, you could do that. On and on and on. I mean, pretty much you can use this in so many different ways, and its versatility is why it's so powerful. Whether it's following up on information to make an aggressive play, or it's simply denying a certain aspect of play, like taking space, clearing hookah, denying plant, whatever the case may be, Brimstone's Orbital Strike is undoubtedly one of the best ultimates in the game. Now we go to the next ultimate in the game, the new ult on the block, Killjoy's Lockdown. Now, this ultimate is a very powerful ultimate at its best, and pro players have even talked about using Killjoy just because of how strong this ultimate is in pro play. But it's also an ultimate that if you use incorrectly, you're gonna get no value because it's just gonna get destroyed. So the important thing that you need to think about, first off, is make sure that no areas around where you're placing this is wall bangable. Second off, you still want to have some amount of information from enemies. The last thing that you want to have happen is that an enemy has flanked you and they get to kill your lockdown for free, and probably you in the process. The third thing that you need to understand when using the Killjoy lockdown is just because it's going to activate doesn't mean enemies have left right away. Sometimes enemies will try to, instead of get out, give up their location, give up their position, they will stand their ground and try to get enough value to make it worth that small time frame. Because if you rush in thinking that the immediate next corner is clear because you think that they ran away from your lockdown and it's not clear, and you and your teammate die, sure, they might get detained, but it's usually worth it, and that's what goes through their mind. It might be a misplay, but whatever the case may be, don't just assume that an area is clear, at least in the first 5 to 7 seconds of the lockdown countdown. On top of that, this ultimate is very powerful, but you gotta make sure that you mark or ping where enemies are likely to be post-ult. If there's a little tiny crack or cubby, or if there are natural areas where they flock to. Keep in mind that this ultimate not only creates space, but it does give you information as well, because you know that enemies have to be in certain areas post-ult, and that is something that you should definitely keep in mind of. Now for the 6th ultimate on this list, this is an incredibly underrated ultimate, and it's a very powerful ultimate in the right hand, as Sentinel Sinatra has showed us, and it's Hunter's Fury. Now Hunter's Fury is very, very powerful, but a lot of people, sometimes they get a little bit of damage and they can't seem to follow up with it. Now the thing about Hunter's Fury that is so strong is not just using it when you find someone, which of course is strong, and if you are using it that way, you typically want to be using an arrow rollout or some form of information gathering, and then you pop your ultimate in advance. Make sure to put your crosshair where you think enemies are going to be discovered, and then you're already ready to ult them the second the information is revealed about them. But the way that Sinatra used it a lot is when enemies are playing a default for a long period of time, he would have allies clear certain areas. They're not C-long, they're not out of garage, they're not mid, whatever the case may be, and then he would say, okay, they're not in all these places, let me just ult out of A, hit A short and A long with his ultimate, and then he would often connect with multiple people trying to sneak up. He knows that enemies couldn't be in these places, so he checks all these other places. And the thing about this ultimate is if there's no premonition of getting discovered and it comes out of nowhere, it stretches so long that you can clear entire sightlines, not only getting information, but a lot of times if you can connect with somebody, it's usually going to convert into some kills or a ton of damage on the enemy team. Very underrated ultimate, very powerful. Definitely try to utilize it like this in your games. Now moving on to the next ultimate on the list, we have Breach, the new ultimate Rolling Thunder that recently got buffed. It's actually pretty powerful now. Now Rolling Thunder is great in a similar way that Orbital Strike is, that it can prevent enemies from planting, prevent enemies from defusing, take point control. It is a very powerful ultimate, but unlike Orbital Strike, the few downsides it does have are pretty big if you don't play around them. The first thing is, if you don't hit an enemy, enemies not only know exactly where you are, but they're going to be ready for you as you come in, and they're going to be able to kill you really easily. Unlike Orbital Strike, that doesn't tell the enemy where you are. So that is the first big thing, and that can be very, very important. Unlike Orbital Strike, that can be more of a solo play, a lot of times if you are rolling thundering onto a point, it is really good for engages, where you know that the enemies are there, but you want to brute force your way through with multiple members of your team. You can invest in Flash, you can invest in Rolling Thunder, and you can push onto point, making sure to clear out all those areas that your ultimate doesn't directly touch. It is your job to keep track of the little parts on the map that aren't directly contested, and if there's a corner, you still gotta physically clear it, because if they're hit by your Rolling Thunder and they just don't move, they're gonna soon become unaffected, and they're gonna be able to turn the tables on you and your teammates. Now moving on to the next ultimate that we have to talk about in this video, ultimate number 8, and it's Viper's Pit. And Viper's Pit used to be one of the worst ultimates in the game because only Viper could stay in it, and sometimes it could mess up your team. But now that the entire team can have the most edgy rave ever inside the Viper's Pit, it is very powerful. If you ever get spiked down, or if you ever plant the spike, or, you know, all scenarios where enemies have to push into you, essentially, an enemy that is stacked inside of a Viper's Pit is probably just the most obnoxious thing ever. I mean, how do you realistically push into that? It would just be very, very difficult, almost impossible. Enemies that come in will not only not be able to see you very well, but they'll be at a health disadvantage, they're at an information disadvantage, and of course, you assume that a large amount of enemies are in there, but if you're trying to push it, maybe not all of them are in there. Maybe if you try to make a play for it, someone is on the flank, someone is controlling another angle. And that is why this ultimate is so scary, because of that unknown factor. Now remember though, if you are the Viper in the Viper's Pit, and your team is doing a strategy where they hide in the Viper's Pit, it is so important that you do not let yourself die. This means playing incredibly passively, not pushing out, hiding in the corner, and committing to it. Because if you try to make an aggressive play and you die, your entire team is going to be just hiding in these cubbies, and all of a sudden, the walls are going to go down on them, and they're going to get destroyed, okay? Very important that if you are the Viper and you're doing a strategy like this, you are the passive one, and you can have different members of your team playing more aggressive inside the Viper's Pit, but not you. You need to stay alive at all costs. Now moving on to the next ultimate that we have on this list, Phoenix's Run It Back. And honestly, this ultimate is incredibly powerful and could be pushed up further than maybe some of these other abilities, but its biggest downside is it's a solo-oriented ability and not a team-oriented ability, but that doesn't mean you can't get a lot of value with it. Now the most important thing that you need to do with Phoenix's Run It Back is if you are using it on attack, you should still be baiting out utility before you use your Phoenix ultimate. You don't want to just be running into tons of utility. Sure, maybe getting the enemy to use a trap wire and a cage is okay, but the ceiling on run it back is much higher than that. You don't want to be just using your ultimate to trade for a little bit of ability value. So that's the first thing that you need to keep in mind. The second thing that you need to keep in mind, of course, and we talk about this a lot, is make sure that your body is not threatened. This happens incredibly often, and that is really the problem when using Phoenix Run It Back later on in the game in a 1v1, because you have to do it so far away that if you run to the enemy, you don't have a long time to fight them. But if you do it too close and they kill you, they can run up on your body and kill it for free. So there is a give and take there. And that's why the best ways to use Phoenix Ultimate is in a way that it's very hard to chase. Like using it on the high ground and jumping down to the low ground to chase enemies. If an enemy is on the low ground, they're not going to be able to transition to the high ground fast enough to contest your body, or using it outside of a teleporter and jumping into the teleporter to contest outside of hookah. The enemies can't go that way through a teleporter, so they're not going to be able to chase your body. These are ways that you set up scenarios where it makes your body impossible to chase, while at the same time getting righted on the action right away. Now moving on to the next ultimate on the list, getting down in the tiers. But you got to remember, pretty much all these ultimates are great in some way. Some of them are just better at setting up team engagements than others, or contributing to an overall win rate than others. Now, this one, 10th on the list, is Showstopper from Raze. Now, a lot of people in the comments, I can already hear it, clack, 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 clack. They're like, what the freak? I just saw Raze get a 5K 10 times in my games. How in the world is Showstopper one of the worst ultimates in the game? Well, look at all the other ultimates and tell me, what do those ultimates do that is so unique and powerful that just a regular op can't do, a regular Vandal can't do, regular gunplay or positioning can't? I mean, when you're comparing it to Resurrection, Orbital Strike, Lockdown, Neural Theft, all of these abilities can set up team engagements that can win an entire team fight by themselves. Now, Showstopper, I'm not going to say that you can't get value with it, but you can sometimes also get no value with it. Sometimes you just get destroyed right off the bat. Sometimes you chase people and you can't find anybody. Sometimes you're pulling it out and you just die right away. I mean, there is a big margin for error. And yes, in your minds, you're envisioning that 3K and 4K and 5K. But be realistic with yourself. Is that the norm? Does that happen every single time you use the ultimate? Or is that just a once every once in a while type of thing? Now, I'm not saying that this ultimate isn't strong, because it is really strong, but you got to be really careful about when you whip it out, how you use it, what you're using it for, and realize that at its ceiling, getting just 1 or 2 kills is fantastic, and that's good enough, but sometimes it gets nothing, and you just die as a result. It gets you killed realistically going for some of these plays. Moving on to the next ultimate on our list. You might not like it as well. I'm just gonna trigger a lot of people with this video. Whatever, it's too late now. Blade Storm on Jett. Now, Blade Storm's Jett has a very high skill ceiling, yes, but it also has a very high skill floor, which means it's very difficult to use this ability. I mean, it's basically just gunplay, right? If you don't have good gunplay, you're not going to be a good Blade Storm. Plus, because of the quick movement, it's actually harder gunplay. And Blade Storm does have a pretty big margin for error. The regular throwing knives or the single fire, that can be pretty slow, especially if you're not hitting headshots, and you're gonna lose to an AR some percentage of the time. And the alternate fire that throws all your shurikens can sometimes fail even when you don't think it should, and that can get you killed. So because of these factors, the ultimate isn't top tier. It requires a lot of skill, and it doesn't give you inherent free value like a whole bunch of the other ultimates on the list. Now, that being said, however, one of the strongest aspects of this ultimate, even stronger than something like Showstopper, is the fact that you can use it on eco. This is something that pros do a lot, where one of their allies doesn't have enough money, they'll buy them the weapon, and they'll just rock a full armor plus their knives and maybe a shorty or something like that. And then they try to pop off with that. Tens does this a lot of other Jetts do this, and that's something that you could do in your games. Very powerful eco tool, and it could be something to use to potentially win a round where you can get like 2 fat kills up against ARs because you go for these really risky, high risk, high reward dash in right click plays. And if you kill 2 people and your teammates upgrade to ARs, all of a sudden you can win this round when none of your teammates had any weapons, all of y'all saved, but you used your ultimate and you popped off with it. So because of that skill ceiling, it is a very powerful ultimate, but remember, the value is not free. unlike tons of these other ultimates where really the value is so like the value floor or the value floor is so high. I mean, the value floor of Bladestorm is you do nothing with your ultimate and you die. So that's a pretty low floor to say the least. Now, moving on to the last ultimate on the list. This is Empress from Reyna. Empress is Reyna's ult. Now, I'm not gonna say that this ultimate is bad either. Like I said, no ultimate on the list is bad, but it doesn't help the team in any way, first off. Second off, it is not guaranteed value at all, and sometimes it's no value actually, because unlike something like Showstopper, which you could cheese out a kill realistically if you really wanted to go for one kill and the enemy was in the proper scenario, you could activate your ultimate and pretty safely get that kill or convert on that kill, right? Empress, not always the case. Now, yes, when you're popping off, it's great, but in that way, it can be somewhat win more. And if you use it, you could also just get shot by an op, headshotted by a vandal, insta-killed by a sheriff, shotgunned by a shorty. I mean, Empress just fits in with Reyna's kit and Reyna's character, which is a very win more character. When you're the best character in the lobby, when you're popping off, when you're clicking all the head, Empress lets you do that even more so, but it doesn't contribute to a team fight. There's no guaranteed value involved, and of course, it all depends on your actual impact on Reyna. But if you're clicking heads anyways, this is not an ultimate that you necessarily need, but it can contribute to some flashy montages, so I guess there's that to say the least. Now, definitely let me know what you thought about my tier list in the comments down below. Do you agree, disagree? Is there anything that you would move around? I know that a lot of people are gonna probably be talking about Run It Back, Showstopper, and Bladestorm the most, but definitely let me know in the comments down below. And the Game Leap website is your one-stop shop to master any of these ultimates and any of these characters. We have in-depth advanced tips and tricks, ult guides, mechanical, game sense positioning, and Radiant tier VOD reviews. Everything you need to climb the ranks of Valorant. Do yourself a favor and go check it out in the links down below, and I can't wait to see you there. See you next time.